He was the American prince. She was the shy, mysterious beauty. JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette-Kennedy had a timeless love story, but the cameras didn't capture everything. Lately, the world has been reliving the love affair between Carolyn Bessette-Kennedy and John F. Kennedy Jr. thanks to Ryan Murphy's 2026 FX show Love Story. The series is partly based on Elizabeth Beller's 2024 biography Once Upon a Time, The Captivating Life of Carolyn Bessette-Kennedy, and claims to show the world what Carolyn was really like. It gets some parts right, but not everything. Carolyn majored in elementary education at Boston University, but after graduation, she ended up becoming a major figure in the world of fashion. But before the world knew about her, she was just a saleswoman at a Calvin Klein boutique at a mall in Boston. She had talent, though. Carolyn was such a natural that Calvin Klein president Suzanne Sokol hired her for a sales job in New York. Telling the New York Times in 1996, "She was absolutely charming. She was completely refreshing. She was completely outgoing." In the Big Apple, Carolyn grew in her role as a salesperson to the rich and famous who seemed to respond to the tall blonde and slender young woman. As another Calvin Klein executive explained, she sold millions of dollars of clothes during her time as a saleswoman. Over her 7 years with the fashion empire, Carolyn moved steadily up the corporate ladder. Her rise to the top was even fueled by Calvin Klein himself. Then, for some reason, she left the company in 1996 before marrying JFK Jr. No one knows for sure why she quit her high-powered job. Every great love story has an origin tale. In the 1980s and early 90s, John F. Kennedy Jr. was New York City's most eligible bachelor who dated a who's who of famous women, including Madonna, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Daryl Hannah. So, was it love at first sight when he laid eyes on Carolyn? The FX series Love Story wants you to think so. It shows them being introduced by Calvin Klein at a 1992 fundraiser in a scene that was definitely written as a love at first sight moment. To juice up the drama, Carolyn doesn't give JFK Jr. her phone number right away as a way to test his desire.
I don't give my number out to strangers. I just met you. You could be a serial killer for all I know.
According to the show's source material, though, their first meeting was a little less dramatic, though still cute. Beller writes that they met in 1992 when JFK Jr. was simply shopping at Calvin Klein. Carolyn was the salesperson selected to help the young man, and as the book relates, unsurprisingly, John came out of the meeting smitten with a few men's suits and Carolyn's phone number. He called within days. The show portrays this happening after they'd already met, but the fundraiser story has also been told by the couple's friends, so the real story is probably somewhere in between the two. If JFK Jr. was a stateside prince, then his mom, Jackie Kennedy Onassis, was the Star-Spangled Queen. But the newfound Cinderella in this family of American royals never met the matriarch.
Last night at around 10:15, my mother passed on. She was surrounded by her friends.
Maybe Carolyn and Jackie O would have been sisters in fashion. We'll never know because JFK Jr. never let Carolyn meet his mom. The two started dating before Jackie Kennedy's death from cancer in 1994, and as Beller wrote, Carolyn became increasingly irked that he wouldn't introduce her to his mother. Why? Beller suspected that at the time, JFK Jr. may still have been dating Daryl Hannah, and he knew his mom wouldn't appreciate the idea of her son doubling up on love. As Beller put it, if Carolyn met Jackie, I think he knew that that would sort of become a life of its own. And maybe he wasn't quite ready for that. The author also contends that the later rocky relationship between the couple may have been directly due to the fact that he never introduced his future wife to Jackie. While they were dating, JFK Jr. and Carolyn were constantly surrounded by paparazzi in their daily NYC lives. So they did what any rich, high-powered couple would do. They got married in secret. They exchanged vows on Cumberland Island, Georgia on September 21, 1996 by the glow of candlelight. There were reportedly only 40 people present in the 19th century chapel for the secret marriage. The glow of candlelight isn't hyperbole either. Dennis Reggie, photographer hired to capture the special day, described the wedding setting, saying, "This is a place where there were no streets, no streetlights, and no lighting. Basically, the sun had set and it was dark and there were candles in the little chapel. No electricity, just candles." An Amish-style wedding, far from the threat of intrusive shutterbugs and press, may not have been Junior's normal style, but it matched Carolyn's sensibilities to a T. The bride's wedding dress, however, was anything other than rustic. In order to get her gown perfect, Carolyn worked for months with a designer who required her to travel to Paris for 2 separate fittings. Like the mother-in-law she never got a chance to meet, Carolyn was more or less destined to become a fashion icon, but she was down to earth in her outfit choices. Some of her minimalist, timeless signature 90s looks included neutral colors, classic Levi's jeans, tailored blazers, and slip dresses, and fashion publications like Harper's Bazaar were clamoring to get her to sit for a cover shoot in the late 90s. But in so many ways, that style transcended the 90s with a timelessness that could be placed into any era. One of the most appealing parts of Ryan Murphy's FX series love story is the peek at Carolyn's daily wardrobe it provides. Alec Ginsberg, who owns Greenwich Village store CO Bigelow, said in 2026 that people have been coming into his store just because Carolyn shopped there. He said, "It's not just the headband, it's that people want to shop where she shopped. Girls will come in and ask if anyone knew her. They try to find out little bits of information." Imagine being a private person your whole life and then suddenly getting hitched to one of the most famous men in the country. JFK Jr. was certainly used to being in the spotlight and getting followed by paparazzi around New York City, but Carolyn had always been a private person, and she tried her best to hold on to that privacy even after her sudden fame. In fact, she never sat down for an official interview with a news publication. As far as anyone can tell, only 2 recordings of her voice exist in the public space. There's this one.
It was very exciting, wonderful evening.
Yeah, what was your highlight? What was the highlight for you?
The entire evening was spectacular. There's no highlight.
And there's this one.
Well,
We're going this way.
Okay.
Awesome.
Good night.
That's like 13 seconds combined. It's kind of remarkable considering how often she was hounded by the press for a soundbite. Being thrust into the harsh glare of fame was a tough sacrifice to make, and at least one biographer claimed JFK Jr. didn't step up to the task of preparing her for everything that came with it. Liz McNeil, journalist and co-author of the book JFK Jr., an intimate oral biography, told the BBC, "John was used to it. He'd grown up with reporters, photographers, and later paparazzi. Friends now say that was a shortcoming on his part, that he didn't give her the emotional support she needed and/or didn't know how to help her." That pensive, quiet, outward personality eventually garnered Carolyn a new reputation in the media. Her shyness was perceived as negative, and she eventually got labeled as an ice queen. The fact that she didn't do one official public interview in her lifetime only fueled that perception. After the famous couple got married, Carolyn thought the media frenzy would finally settle down. But the paparazzi continued to show up every day outside their Tribeca residence. Basically, it was all too easy for tabloids to paint a cold picture of Carolyn, but according to her close friends, that couldn't have been further from the truth. McNeil told the BBC, "The friends we interviewed for our book all talked about how warm she was, how generous." Those same friends also said that Carolyn was fiercely protective of the people she loved. Her friend, Colleen Curtis, told the Daily News, "Carolyn should also be remembered for her warmth, for her kindness and generosity, for her wit, for her compassion, and most of all, for her great sense of fun." It's a stark shift from the elitist recluse that the media at the time portrayed, but it's something just about all of her friends have said at some point.
She had this crazy ability to make you feel like you were the only person in the room.
After interviewing friends to write Once Upon a Time, Bella wrote, "She was joyful and buoyant and wanted to partake of everything in New York. She was a warm, effervescent, and vivacious person who was misrepresented in the press." Perhaps with time, the media would have eventually been able to capture Carolyn's real personality. But on a foggy night on July 16, 1999, JFK Jr., Carolyn, and her sister Lauren Bessette boarded a single-engine plane in Fairfield, New Jersey to fly to Massachusetts. JFK Jr. served as the plane's only pilot despite limited experience flying at night and less than ideal conditions. The plane crashed into the Atlantic Ocean about an hour into the flight, killing all 3 passengers aboard. In 2000, the National Transportation Safety Board revealed that the flying instructor had tried to fly with them that evening. The instructor apparently told JFK Jr. what the investigation had revealed, that the conditions weren't ideal for an inexperienced pilot. However, Kennedy wanted to take the yoke alone. The NTSB concluded the probable cause of JFK Jr.'s fatal plane crash was failure to maintain control of the airplane. In other words, pilot error, likely because he became disoriented. All 3 passengers were in their 30s at the time of their deaths. JFK Jr. and Carolyn had been married almost 3 years when they boarded the plane, but the enduring question is, were they happily married? The FX series Love Story shows the couple arguing before takeoff, and it also claims that JFK Jr. had been staying in a hotel as their acrimony reached a fever pitch. The series contends that the couple may have already been separated before they died. Bella wrote that the narrative was a little murky even for those who knew them, saying, John had told several friends and colleagues that he and Carolyn were splitting up, yet others noted they seemed very happy together even the weekend before. What's pretty much confirmed is that the couple was inundated with conflict in the weeks before they died. JFK Jr.'s magazine George was failing, and Carolyn was still struggling to deal with the constant media circus outside of their NYC residence. Furthermore, JFK Jr.'s cousin and best friend, Anthony Radziwill, was battling terminal cancer. Despite the challenges, Anthony's wife Carol said, "To say their marriage was on the rocks is just inaccurate." In the 1990s, perhaps no couple was as famous as the Kennedys of NYC. Despite Carolyn's animosity toward the media, she was still a constant tabloid presence. Now, decades later, is it possible that Carolyn's mystique and timeless fashion sense has made her more famous than her husband? In a 2026 interview with the BBC, Liz McNeil discussed her legacy, saying, "She never gave an interview, so maybe the images took on more power over time. There's an entirely new audience of people who may not have been alive when she was. She remains elegant, mysterious, and alluring." And because of the popularity of Ryan Murphy's love story, people are getting to see Carolyn in a whole new light. The series shows the fashion icon as much more than just the Ice Queen that the media portrayed, and instead gives her a sympathetic narrative. Connor Hines, who was a member of the Love Story production team, said, "I kind of couldn't believe the contrast between the persona people knew her as and the woman we were reading about. This was somebody who was so full of life, but when documented, was obviously quite scared."